Om Vasudevasudam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Nam Vande Jagadgurum Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Namaskaram, and welcome to our fifth series in Vichara Dashakam. The language format of this lecture will be in English. And before we start with our formal introduction, please stand by for the following audio presentation. Before we start with our formal introduction,
Vanamali, Vanamali, Uttama Purusha. In the wedding hall of life, I searched for a bridegroom, holding the garland of white flowers in my hand. Countless times was I born, and countless times did I die, and countless are the roles that I played, searching for thee, but I never found my perfect partner. Oh Vanamali, oh Vanamali, I never found my perfect partner.
this beautiful song and poem you have just heard is a devotional composition that was sung by our next guest in the Vichara Dashakam series, and I am honored to introduce Vanamali Mataji to grace our presence with her lecture. Vanamali Mataji is indeed a child of Guruvayur, born in the blessed town where our parent Sri Krishna temple resides in Kerala, and remained to be a devotee of Lord Krishna. After an illustrious career in education, she finally heard her calling to serve the Lord full-time under the guidance of her guru, Sri Jayendra Saraswati, and she never looked back since. Her offerings include many bhajans and poetic compositions, and 16 detailed books on Sanatana Dharma and various deities of the Hindu pantheon, which we will list at the end of the lecture for your information. I would also like to briefly mention that she and her family are also longtime supporters of our Guruvayurpan Temple of Brampton since its early days in Caledon, if you remember, which is estimated to be about around 2 decades. Vanamali Mataji currently resides in Vanamali Gita Yoga Ashram at Rishikesh. The ashram is engaged in conducting regular puja, satsangs, meditation sessions, and many social service projects such as food and clothes provisioning for the needy, education, and housing development for the underprivileged. So without taking more time, I will pass the floor on to Mataji. Om Namo Narayanaya.
Om Shri Krishnaya Parabrahmane Namah. Vamshi Vibhushidagaram Navanidarabat Pidambara Darunabimba Baladharoshtad Purnend Sundaramugadaravindhanetrat Krishna Param Imabhidattvamaham Najani Krishna Param Imabhidattvamaham Najani. I know of nothing greater than Lord Krishna, who is the color of the rain clouds, clad in yellow garments, with a face like the radiant as the full moon, eyes like lotus petals, lips like bimba berries, and who carries a flute in his hand. To that glorious personality of Lord Krishna, I make my obeisance. May he bless all of us to listen to the story of his incredible life with deep attention. Hari Om. That's According to Hinduism, God takes on a human form whenever the Sanatana Dharma or our ancient way of righteousness declines. This human form is known as an avatara. The word avatara means descent, and this descent is a direct manifestation in humanity by the divine in order to re-establish the ancient code of righteous behavior and to aid the human soul in its ascent to the divine status. It is a manifestation from above of that which we have to develop from below. We have many avatars, but the two main human ones are that of Sri Rama and Sri Krishna, who are historical personages. Lord Krishna declares in the Bhagavad Gita, Yada yada hi dharmasya granit bhavati bharata abhyuttanam adharmasya tadatmanam sujamyaham paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkridam dharma samstavanartaya sambhavami yuge yuge. I shall incarnate myself every time that our ancient dharma goes into a decline. The avatara comes to give the outer religion of humanity an inner meaning, which will enable it to grow to its original divine status. The ordinary person has to evolve and ascend to Godhead, but the avatara is a direct descent into the human form. The first is a birth from ignorance into ignorance under the shroud of Maya or the cosmic veil. The other is a birth from knowledge to knowledge, with all powers intact and a full awareness and consciousness of his supreme status. He is thus a dual phenomenon, for he appears human and is yet divine. This has to be, for the object of the avatara is to show that human birth, with all its limitations, can still be the means for a divine unfolding. He might even assume human sorrow, like Sri Rama, in order to show that suffering itself may be the cause of redemption. The avatara of Krishna, however, is unique because even in the hours of deepest sorrow and travail, he showed himself to be a complete master of the situation, thus exemplifying the truth of how one who is established in unity with the divine can remain unaffected in the midst of pain and sorrow. Hence, his avatara in the form of Krishna is known as the Purnavatara, or the complete descent of the entire divinity into the form of humanity. The Sanskrit word Krishna has two meanings. It means a dark one. It also has another root, and that is akarsha, which means to entice or enchant. Both these meanings are true of the great incarnation known as Lord Krishna. He was dark in color and had the ability to attract all those who came within his orbit. The story of his life has thrilled the hearts of all those who have been fortunate enough to have heard it. That is why, despite the fact that he existed more than 5,000 years ago, the tale is as delightful and exciting as it was during his own lifetime. The story of a divine manifestation is always filled with mystery and defies all attempts at human analysis. The river of time collects flotsam and jetsam on its way, and the story of the Lord's life has been embellished with a wealth of detail, so perhaps true, perhaps imaginary. Fact and fiction, truth and fantasy are all interwoven. But the final test of truth is time itself. It is a true touchstone it deletes the dross and retains the gold. In and through the seemingly redundant detail that has woven itself around the story through the centuries, it retains its breathtaking beauty, for it is dominated by the powerful influence of Krishna's enchanting personality, in which the wisdom of the seer is mingled with the charm and simplicity of a child, and his glory gushes forth in an inexhaustible fountain of divine love and wisdom. The advent of Lord Krishna came at a time when the common person in Bharatavarsha was without a simple religion that would satisfy his emotional wants and elevate him spiritually without taxing him intellectually like the Vedas and the Upanishads. Unlike the Brahman, Krishna could be communed with through love and service, and he responded to the earnest prayers and deepest yearnings of the human heart. His spiritual teaching is known as a Bhagavada Dharma and is chiefly expounded in the Bhagavad Purana, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Uddhava Gita. The simplicity of his teachings was such that it could be followed by any man, woman, or child, unlike the Vedic teachings, which were meant only for the intelligent and the elite. Krishna is the human version of the metaphysical Satchidananda Brahman, existence, consciousness, and bliss of the Upanishads, who took on a human form to help the ordinary mortal to attain moksha through bhakti or devotion alone, and not only through the path of tapas as advocated in the Upanishads. He is the perfect example of a totally liberated person who is ever in a state of cosmic consciousness, whose contact transformed even sinners into saints, ignorant men into sages, sense-bound beings like the gopis into spiritual ecstatics, and even animals into devotees. He is the expression of the redeeming love of God for humanity, which manifests itself in different ages and in different lands, bringing spiritual enlightenment and bliss to our dreary life. But he is also the Uttama Purusha, the perfect person. He is the eternal boy, the paragon of masculine beauty, who always retained his spiritual nobility, absolutely unaffected and unperturbed in every situation, be it amid the poverty and hardships of the cowherd settlement, the rigors of a hermitage, the seductive charms of dancing beauties, the peaceful interludes with his friends, the gory scenes of the battlefield, or the self-destructive holocaust of his own kith and kin. As he himself taught, Krishna lived in this world of duality, as the lotus leaf in the water, absolutely untouched and unaffected by the environment, always a witness and never a victim of the situation. The British tried their best to say that Krishna was a mythical character. However, modern technology has proved that Krishna was indeed a historical personage. The great city of Dwaraka that he built, and which, according to the Mahabharata, was swept into the sea at the time of his demise, has now been brought to light. The sea kept its secrets for many centuries, but today, with all modern resources, the underwater archaeologists have discovered the city of Dwaraka, fully preserved under the waters of the sea, exactly as it was described in the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Purana. Now let us go back to see where and how he was born. He was born in the city of Mathura, in the clan of the Yadavas, as the 8th son of a noble couple called Devaki and Vasudeva. His uncle Kamsa was the king of the Yadavas and was a very wicked man. It was prophesied that the 8th son of Devaki and Vasudeva would kill him and put an end to his tyrannical rule. Kamsa immediately clapped Devaki and Vasudeva in a dungeon. However, the divine decree can never be false. Krishna was born in the dungeon. Soon after his birth, his father secretly took him away to the cowherd settlement of Gokula and exchanged him for the newborn infant of the chieftain of the settlement known as Nandagopa and Yashoda. Thus Krishna grew up as an ordinary cowherd boy, a Gopala, the son of Nanda and Yashoda. As a child, he was mischievous and willful, charming all with his precocious acts. He escaped from the clutches of all the wicked people who had been sent by Kamsa to kill him. His sportive activities in the village of Gokula and later in the settlement of Vrindavana were quite miraculous and delighted the simple cowherds who marveled at the divine power invested in the child. Even though he was only 12 years old, he was irresistible to all the cowherd girls or gopis who desired to get him as their husband or lover. His play with them has a deep esoteric meaning, which we cannot go into at the moment. At the age of 12, he went to Mathura, where he killed his uncle Kamsa, thus freeing the Yadavas from the rule of the tyrant. He grew up to be a hero, valiant and invincible, and gradually assumed the leadership of the Yadava and Rishni clans. But he never accepted the title of king. In fact, he always played the role of a kingmaker and never a king. The country at that time was filled with petty kingdoms that were always fighting with each other and trying to grab land for themselves. Jarasandha, the great king of Magadha, was determined to capture the city of Mathura, which was open to attack from all sides. Krishna, therefore, transported his people across the continent of India to the west coast, where he built the town of Dwarka on the western sea coast of India or Bharatavarsha. He defeated many of the tyrant kings of that time and made the Yadavas into one of the most powerful forces of the age. He played an important part in shaping the cultural and political life of his times. The Pandavas belonged to the Kuru dynasty, and their mother Kunti was Krishna's maternal aunt. They were very noble people, and Krishna chose them to help him overcome the adharmic forces who were trying to take over the country. Though he did not take up arms, he played a decisive part in the great war of the Mahabharata, in which the Pandavas fought with the Kauravas, who were their own cousins. As a man, he was a Mahayogi, the greatest of all yogis, totally unattached, having complete mastery of himself and nature, capable of controlling the very elements, if need be. His miracles were only an outflow of his perfect unity with the supreme fountain of all power. His most famous teaching is contained in the Bhagavad Gita, which was the advice he gave to his friend and cousin, Arjuna, at the commencement of the great battle known as the Mahabharata War. Arjuna begs Krishna to help him out of his dilemma. Arjuna's problem was a particular one related to his special need. Krishna's answer was not limited to Arjuna's unique case, but cut at the very root of the human problem, which is one of ignorance. Ignorance of the nature of our own selves, ignorance of the nature of the Supreme Being, and ignorance of the nature of the universe that we inhabit. This is why the Bhagavad Gita is still as fresh and applicable to modern life as it was when it was first given to Arjuna 5,000 years ago. There are only two instances in his life that he gave advice. One was to Arjuna on the battlefield, and the other to his friend Uddhava at the end of his life when he was about to depart from this earthly realm. Both seem to be diametrically opposite. Arjuna, the Kshatriya, who had an active and volatile nature, was advised to fight the war. Uddhava, who had a contemplative nature, was advised to leave everything and retire to the Himalayas to meditate. This was in accordance with the teaching that says that each person's swadharma, or personal duty, should be in tune with his swabhava, or nature. He did not give one adamantine rule of conduct that was applicable to the whole of humanity, with no consideration of the differences in their natures. Everyone was free to choose the path to divinity that suited their own temperament. Hinduism gives many such paths and does not declare that there is only one path and one gate to heaven, and all those who do not go through that path are condemned to eternal hell. Even though he advised Arjuna to fight, it does not mean that Krishna advocates war, but he accepts it as part of the game of life. He tried his best to avert the war, but the Kauravas were determined to fight, and at last he had to give in and agree. In fact, he himself went as ambassador to the court of the Kurus to try and stop Duryodhana from this terrible war which he was forcing upon the Pandavas. Krishna says that it is best to avoid war if one can't possibly do it. But if it becomes unavoidable, it is better to accept it bravely and joyfully rather than run away from it. He says that in life, one has to pass through the door of war as well as the door of peace. A weak person cannot maintain peace. If he wants peace, he would have to have the strength and ability to fight a war. Whether he wins or loses is immaterial, but he should have the strength and courage to face it if called upon to do so. And he should fight to the best of his ability. Whenever our dharma is at stake, it is our duty to fight for it. Otherwise, it will disintegrate and fall into the hands of those who are determined to destroy it, which is what is happening today. Moreover, this is a world of duality. We cannot have joy without sorrow or beauty without ugliness, nor can we have peace without war. These are all opposite sides of the coin of life. Warmongers like Genghis Khan, Hitler, and Alexander accepted only one side of the coin of life and believed that war was the only way. Pacifists like Mahavira, Buddha, and Gandhiji, on the other hand, chose the other side of the coin. Both these types are easy enough to understand, but Krishna is not that easy. The world is facing a situation similar to that which occurred during the Mahabharata war. At that time, there were two camps, one composed of the Kauravas, who were totally materialistic and did not accept anything beyond the body or material objects. They had no idea of spiritual discipline. Their protagonists were the Pandavas, who were the epitome of Dharma, and thus they were chosen by Krishna to bring back the land to its original culture and refinement. The present scenario is very similar. On one side are arrayed the forces that stand for the advance of civilization, taking into account all the known moral standards that are given by most religions. On the other side is a force that thinks itself to be totally right, and though believing in a God full of compassion, is still willing to kill those who do not believe in that God. They are determined to force their beliefs on the whole world. Their ideology is colored by some standard of intellectual integrity, totally at variance with moral norms. Their actions are enforced by their belief in the existence of a heaven in which they will be rewarded for their good deeds on this world. Krishna's advice in the Bhagavad Gita points out that this type of thinking is based on a false and narrow concept of the Creator as well as of creation. In the galaxy of spiritual luminaries that the world has produced, Krishna is the only one who did not teach that we are living in this world for the sake of another world. Most religions ask us to abstain from all the pleasures of this world. They insist that God and nature are two totally different things, and anyone who wants to find God has to shun nature. These religions came into existence at a time when life was really hard. The nature they knew was harsh and cruel. Their lives were ridden with fear of nature and fear of a God whose designs they could not understand. Religious heads preyed on this human weakness
and made people believe that if they were good in this life, they would go to a heaven in which they would get all the good things that they were denied in this life. Those who did not follow these rules would be damned to eternal hell. The only way was to believe in God and shun this world filled with snares. In this age of advanced technology, science has already eliminated most of the hardships of life. So the reason to be good has to be something other than the hope of a heaven after death. More and more people are scoffing at religions that promise us heavenly delights if we behave in certain ways that are considered socially and morally good on this earth. We live in a scientific age, and one would think that religions believing in this sort of ideology would have no relevance now. 5,000 years ago, Krishna had already discarded such a view of life. He insisted that heaven, if there be such a place, should be here and now. He never offered the uncertain bait of a wonderful life after death in order to entice people to become good in this life. He said that this very life was being capable of being filled with joy. Ihaiva tairjada sargaha is what he said. Ihaiva tairjada sargaha. If there is a heaven, it is to be found here and now. He is the only God who's always laughing, never wearing a long face, playing the flute, and joyously accepting every situation. He goes against all our preconceived notions of how a God should behave. And that is why he has never been understood by mediocre minds steeped in sensuality and middle-class morality. The multifaceted personality of Krishna defies all attempts at cutting him down to fit our particular idea of how a God should look and behave. He is unique and therefore can never be made to fit into any of the niches in which the human mind loved to deposit people. Actually, he belongs to the future and not to the past. None of us have reached the heights of his intelligence or powers. Of course, it is true to say that all those who have made a mark with this world have come far ahead of their time. But Krishna was perhaps too far ahead. That is why he was not fully understood in his own time or even in these times. Hopefully, there will come a time when people will begin to understand such a glorious being. The wonder is that such a mighty being lived centuries before modern civilization as we know it existed. He is indeed a unique personality. His life accepts no limitations. He was not bound by any rules of pseudo-morality. If anyone can be said to have been totally free, it is only Krishna. There was no ground that he did not tread, no point where his steps faltered, and no limits that he did not transcend. This freedom is the ultimate fruit of all enlightenment. As I said, in any situation, he was always the victor and never the victim. A truly emancipated person, a sthita prajna, as it is explained in the Bhagavad Gita, should unreservedly be able to accept all the dimensions of life. He should be above the dualities of existence, like love and hate, sex and abstinence, violence and non-violence, action and meditation, as well as asceticism and indulgence. Krishna lived like a actor who participates in everything with enthusiasm, always knows that he's only playing a part. No other religious leader has shown this type of acceptance of life. If you want to ascend to the heights, you have to be prepared to descend to the abyss first. In the history of the world, it is only Krishna who was able to do this. He alone can be whole, who's prepared to accept the whole of this world with all its contradictions. The charm of his avatara is the perfection with which he played every role he was called upon to play. He was a staunch friend, a dutiful son, an exciting lover, and a model husband, not to just one, but to all the women who desired. There was none who who called to him with intensity, to whom he did not go with speed. He says, howsoever a man approaches me, in that same manner do I go to him. Ye yada mam prabhadyante, tam sadaiva bhajamyaham, was what he said. In whatever guise people looked at him, as son, lover, friend, or husband, he went to them in that very form in which they visualized him and satisfied their desires in the way that was most meaningful to them. At the same time, he sublimated their desires and fulfilled their earthly life and led them to eternal bliss. There was no one who approached him, whether saint or sinner, in hatred or fear or love, who did not attain liberation. According to him, the difference between a Kamsa who tried to kill him and a Kuchela who worshipped him is slight indeed. One approached him with hatred and the other with love, but both thought of him constantly and were thus rewarded with moksha or liberation. An object of mortal dread and antagonism can produce as much absorption of the mind as an object of love. If this object of dread happens to be God, concentration on him, though motivated by antagonism, must purify the person, just as potent and unpleasant medicine must effect a cure, even though you don't believe in it, or even though you don't know what it is made out of. This is what the Bhagavad Purana declares. His actions during the span of his earthly life were meant not only to bless his contemporaries and establish righteousness on earth, but to provide a spiritually potent account of his earthly deeds for the uplifting of the future generations. By reading and meditating on these stories, one can establish a devotional relationship with him, similar to that which his devotees had during his lifetime. Even during his lifetime, he became canonized amongst those of his own clan, as well as among many others. He was looked upon as the incarnation of Vishnu, the preserver in the trinity made up of Brahma, Vishnu, and Maheshwara. At the end of his life, he chose to leave this world as a mortal and not as a god. He who had all the powers to control nature did not choose his own body to remain forever. It is also a lesson to us that this mortal body has no ultimate value, and the way of those established in the Brahman is to let it fall without regret after it has served its purpose. After the holocaust of his own people, he left for the forest and sat beneath a tree and established himself in a superconscious state. Seeing his foot from afar through the branches of a bush, a hunter's boy mistook it for the face of a deer and shot a poisoned arrow at it. When he ran to collect his prey, he saw to his horror that the arrow was lodged in the divine foot of the Lord. He begged him to kill him for his crime, but Krishna smiled at him and told him that he had only been an instrument in the following out of his own wishes. He blessed him and told him that he would be taken to the abode of all noble people. At the time of his departure, it is said that the whole sky was filled with the celestials that had come to watch this final act in the drama of the Lord's life. Just as at the time of the Advent, the sky was covered with a pearly light, and the air seemed to be filled with the music of the spheres. His form seemed to glow with an unearthly light and melted into the elements before the wondering eyes of the celestials. Even they failed to trace his path as he disappeared from the earthly scene. He had simply dissolved back into the divinity that is present in the whole of creation. Krishna had prophesied that Dwaraka would revert into the sea from which he had reclaimed it within a week of his departure from this planet. And so it happened. 7 days after the Lord's departure, the ocean swept away the last vestiges of the once prosperous city of Dwaraka. It is only recently that the existence of such a wondrous city, the golden city of Dwaraka, was discovered by Dr. Rao and his team of underwater specialists. The Bhagavada Dharma is the name of the philosophy that Krishna propounded, and it provides a devotional gospel in which intellect, action, and emotion, jnana, karma, and bhakti play equal parts, and proclaims him as the Purushottama, the supreme person who had incarnated himself for the sake of humanity. The gist of this dharma can be found in the famous words, Kayena vaja manasendriyaiva buddhyalpanava prakrite swabhavat karomi yadyat sagalam parasme Sri Narayanaye samarpayami. Whatever I do with my mind, intellect, or senses, either consciously or unconsciously, I surrender it all at the feet of Sri Narayana. Krishna is the very soul of compassion. He made a solemn promise to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita that he would ever take care of all those who thought of him constantly. Ananya chintayanto mam yejana paryupasade tesham nitya abhayuktanam yoga kshemam vahamyaham is what he said. I will personally look after both the material and spiritual welfare of all those who think of me constantly. This can be done only by a conscious acceptance of the fact that we are only instruments in his hands. We are agents of that divinity that is constantly guiding us from the time of our birth to the time of our death. He is the divine charioteer seated within the hearts of all, who will lead us to liberation if we place our total trust in him. Kaunteya pradijanihi name bhakta pranashyadi. O son of Kunti, I swear to you that my bhakta will never fall. This is a solemn promise he made to Arjuna and through him to all of us. So let us all become his bhaktas, his instruments in his hands, and thus allow his grace to fall upon all of us. Om Shri Krishnaya Paramatmane Namaha. Om Shri Parthasarade Namaha. We will end with a peace prayer. Om Swasti Prajabhyam Paripalayantam Nyayena Margena Mahim Mahishaha Go Brahmane Prit Sugamastulityam Loka Samastat Sukhino Bhavantu Loka Samastat Sukhino Bhavantu Loka Samastat Sukhino Bhavantu Sarvesham Swastir Bhavatu Sarvesham Shantir Bhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschit Dukkha Bhav Bhave. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om. Thank you very much for having arranged this for me. It is a beautiful experience. I'm glad to be here for one. Now, I think if you have any questions, we have some few minutes to.
Yeah. Thank you so much, dear Mataji, for this inspiring lecture. Our love for Krishna is most overflowing after your talk. Namaste. Thank you. We will now be presenting a brief video of the ashram, first where Mataji resides, and we'll have question and answer period after. Here we go. Hari Om Ma. This question has been in my mind for quite a long time. Whenever I read about Lord Krishna or watch his stories in the form of a TV series, they always show him smiling in every situation, no matter what. This question may sound amusing, but I'm very curious as why it is so, as I don't see the same for other other deities. Hari Om Tat Sat.
I think I already said in the talk that he was a Purnamatara, and he was always ever composed in every situation. He was a true Siddha Pratnya, which he described in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, who was always the same in every situation, who accepts, because he accepts the duality of life. But because we don't accept, we want only one side of the coin of life, which is the positive side. But we are scared or we don't accept the other side. But he was not like that. He was a whole person who accepted both this. So in bad situations, so-called bad situations or so-called good situations, he was ever the same. And that is why he's called as a Purnavatara, because none of the other deities did.
Okay, and we have another question here. Hari Om Ma, as you have said before, that if there is one thing that Krishna doesn't not like is taking him for granted. Ma, can you please explain what this means? Is there a fine line between having faith and taking Krishna for granted?
Yes, the thing is, when you established, when you sort of establish a contact with him, you will start thinking, it's like familiarity breeds contempt, you know, that's what we mean. For instance, Arjuna and all those who are with him. Arjuna, in fact, did take him for granted. Uddhava never did. Uddhava always knew that he was divine. Whereas here, we also, when we start, he starts behaving. Even now, we can establish the same type of contact with him as his devotees used to have during his lifetime. And after some time, you feel that he's so familiar to us and he's doing everything for us, and that we start to, you forget that he is really divine. And we it's a very, very peculiar thing. You just start taking things for granted, like we take our mothers for granted, and we forget to thank him. We forget to tell him that how happy I am that I know you are helping me. And thank you so much. That feeling of gratitude after some time leaves you when you find out all things he is doing everything for you, and that is very important. So every day, at the end of the day, before you go to sleep, which is a very good habit to thank him for all the list of things that is whether good or bad, both. Remember, both are equally coming from him. So you should thank him for both the good and the bad, and have a kind of that's where you establish a very personal contact with him, which is something which is very important. Because otherwise, if you take him for granted, naturally he disappears from you, which is what you find in the Rasa Leela. When Radha started to take him for granted, he just disappeared from her wish. And they had to cry and ask him, beg him to come back. And then again they came back. That is an episode in the Rasa Leela, which is gives that idea.
The next question I have is, can Mataji please expound on the Mahatmyam of Guruvayur?
The what?
She said
Mahatmyam.
Mahatmyam, yes.
Mahatmyam. It's a Sanskrit word. So Mahatmyam. Mahat means importance of Guruvayur. The story goes that Vigraham or Murti, which we find in Guruvayur, was the one that was worshipped by Lord Krishna's parents, Vasudeva and Devaki, in Dwaraka. Throughout the time they were there in Dwaraka. So at the end, when the Dwaraka was swept away by the sea, this idol was found floating on the sea. And it is said that the wind god Vayu brought it closer and closer to the ocean. And it is picked up by the Brihaspati, the guru of the gods. And Brihaspati told Vayu to take him, waft him through the air so that they could find some place where it could be established. So it is said that Vayu took Brihaspati throughout the subcontinent of India, and until at last they came to this place in Guruvayur, where they saw, at that time, the pond in Guruvayur was a huge lake. and they saw that Shiva and Parvati was dancing on the banks of the lake. And immediately Brihaspati said, this is the place from where we should establish this this idol, this murti. So Vayu brought him down, and it was here that on this very spot that the murti was established, and that is why, because it was put by Guru and Vayu, it is known as Guru Vayu. But it is the idol has been worshipped from the time of the Krishna avatar. From that time, by his parents, and probably by Krishna himself, he might have seen it many times. So it's a very special and important murti.
The next question I have is, can Mataji clarify who exactly Uddhava is? There are some excerpts I have read that Uddhava is a cousin of Krishna from his father's side, but Vasudeva's side. Other excerpts say he's just a friend, a Yadava devotee, and a bhakta. If Mataji can clarify if there is actually a relation, a blood relation.
Yes. Uddhava was also Yadava. And he was a very good friend also of Krishna. And actually Krishna's minister, he made him his own prime minister actually, even though he didn't become a king, he was also the prime minister to Ugrasena, who was the king. So Uddhava was a highly enlightened, highly erudite, and yet amazing devotee. I mean, he was different from the Arjuna. Arjuna treated him like a friend. That's why in Hinduism we can have many approaches to God. That of a friend, Sakya Bhava. Then in Uddhava's case, it is Dasya Bhava, that he always thought of himself as a slave of Krishna, as a servant of Krishna. So he's different, but he was certainly a Yadava. He belonged to the Yadava clan.
Another question I have is, Pandava says the Pandavas had fought the war as that was their duty, but still they say that the Pandavas approached Lord Shiva for forgiveness. When they have guidance from Krishna, why again do they need forgiveness from Lord Shiva?
Well, in those times, at the time of Krishna, the Shiva was the prominent deity, the Adi Deva. He was the Adi Deva, the first deity in India. The first deity was Adi Deva, was Shiva himself. So even Krishna was supposed to have meditated on Shiva or worship Shiva. When he wanted to have a child who was Shiva's avatar, Samba was his avatar actually, he prayed to Shiva. So the Pandavas were also Shiva Bhaktas. Naturally, were all Shiva Bhaktas, because at that time, Shiva was the only deity on the scene. So then, when at the end of the war, Shiva was actually supposed to have been guarding them all the time. Throughout the war, he was also there on the battlefield. Many people who saw him described his form, going up and down that and guarding the Pandavas from there. So naturally, at the end of the war, they had to make their prostrations to Shiva and beg his forgiveness, because whatever it is war, and a lot of actions which are violent actions will take place. And for that, they begged his forgiveness.
I'm just going to give us a quick short introduction about the temple. So we are from Brampton, Ontario, Canada, and the temple is called as Guru Ayyappan Temple of Brampton. That is a temple you see on the screen right now. So the main deity is Guru Ayyappan, and you have Lord Ganesh, Swami Ayyappan, and Devi Ma on your right hand side of the image. You can see it there. And this is constructed very similar way in the same Agama style as it was done in Guruvayur. And at Guru Ayyappan Temple of Brampton, we conduct a major series of talks and lectures on various topics of Sanatana Dharma. So we try to conduct it every quarterly. So this quarterly, we decided to have a talk called Vichara Dashagam. So as it says, Dashagam means 10. So 10 eminent speakers we decided to pick. And this time we wanted to give it a special twist. We decided to invite all female speakers. So this particular Vichara Dashagam, which started on Jan 23rd and going till March 27th, features 10 eminent female speakers. And you can see Mataji is the 5th speaker in this series. And we have 5 more speakers scheduled. And the next speaker to come and grace us is Brahmacharini Sri Priya Chaitanya ji. She's coming from London, UK, and she will be the speaker next week. That is Saturday, the 27th of Feb. You can see the timings on a screen. And the temple also has quite a lot of activities, pujas, satsangs, and around 10 different online courses. And all these online courses are given free of cost to all devotees all around the globe. So if you need any information, you can visit our guruvayur.website. And we also have emails which go out every week. And plus, we also post our latest updates and all the information on Facebook, WhatsApp, and Twitter.
So the next question I have here is, Hari Om Mataji, I wonder why it is always Radhe Shyam. Rukmini is rarely there in the picture. Thank you, Hari Om.
Okay, well, that's a good question. The fact is that, you know, always the beloved is more important than the actual wife, because now it seems strange to say that, but the fact is that why are the gopis were considered the highest or the greatest for all the devotees? Because of this very reason, that they cared for nothing except Krishna. They were totally detached from everything else, all personal relationships, everything, totally. Now also a secret, a girl in those days, not nowadays, of course. This doesn't apply to the modern girl, because the modern girls go and stay with men and nobody ever thinks anything about it. But in those days, if a woman left her own family and ran away to meet her lover, she had literally burnt her boats. She could not come back. And who knew whether the lover would accept her or would throw her off? Nothing, there was nothing, she had no guarantee of anything. So she just left because of her greatest love for that man. Now, this is the sort of love that we have to have for God. When God alone exists in this world. But a wife, on the other hand, is different. The wife has the support of the society. If the husband leaves her, she will not be looked down upon by the society. She will be supported. She will get some money. She will have children, and she will be able to live a happy life. But not so the girl who leaves everything and goes to meet her lover at midnight at that time, knowing full well that she's totally burnt her boat. So that is the greatest type of bhakti which is extolled in our scriptures, because the bhakta really doesn't care for anything what the world might think of her, what other people may say about her. Her entire and whole, and this applies not to women alone but to men also, where the bhakti to God is concerned, when we are prepared to give up everything for the sake of God. That's why in India you'll find that even now people take to the roads. They just leave their houses and go. The first hippies were found in India when people just left. People left their home, hearts, and all that was important to them. What was comfortable, their comfort zone, if you want to call it that, for the sake of God, when they went out into the world, totally dependent God alone. That is why the highest bhakti is that, and that's why you find Radhe Shyam and not Rukmini Shyam. Moreover, at that time we all of us had we believed that the woman had greater power. So again, it's Gauri Shankar, not Shiva Parvati. Shiva Parvati is also there, but Gauri Shankar and so on. Okay.
Oh, Mataji, that was enlightening to me as well. I always had the same question growing up, why Radha and why not the rest of the consorts? But this was very enlightening. One more question I will ask Mataji, and then we'll do a wrap up. Why is the Bala Gopala aspect of Krishna worshipped? He is the one that is worshipped, the flute, the cowherd, the small Krishna, the baby Krishna. He's usually the one who's most glorified in bhajans and in temples. You don't see too much of the adult Krishna, the one who grew up and became, a friend of the Pandavas and an actual Gita Acharya. We're always focusing on the Balagopala aspect. And
because
so,
somehow the Bhagavad Purana glorified his life in Gokula and Vrindavan more than his life in Dwaraka. So that has caught the imagination of almost everyone. And somehow we always think of him as the Balagopala or Gopala Krishna, and rather than the charioteer of Arjuna. But now that is coming into prominence. In fact, I don't know when any of you have read the Krishna Leela, Vanamali's Krishna Leela, and that, according to Krishnananda Swamiji of Shivananda Ashram, is the first ever book written which gives the entire life of Krishna from birth right up to his ascension, and does not leave out any part of his life, and not definitely not that part of his life which was in Dwaraka. And so that is a very important, that's quite an interesting book which gives the entire life of Krishna. But that has never been given in Sanskrit, actually, to speak the truth, because the Bhagavad Purana accents his life in the Gokula. And that is, of course, stirred the imagination of everybody, because everybody loves to see him as that naughty little Krishna. And that is why, now obviously, sculptures also take up that form of Krishna. But Gopala Krishna is also very important. But now, of course, the form, his famous listing of his holding the chariot as a charioteer of Arjuna is also coming into prominence.
Thank you, Mataji. So that will wrap up our questions. We're now at 10:40. We'll show a very quick PowerPoint presentation on Mataji's works, and then we'll have a wrap up of the session.
Thanks a lot, Mataji. And if anyone wants to follow or get more information, you can always go to vanamaliashram.org. That's their website. And as you heard from Smita today, Mataji has written close to 16 plus books. So in the screen now, you can see all those 16 books she has authored. That is the first set. And so these are all the titles of her various books. And if you want to know more about the books, or if you want to buy them, the easiest way to do is just send an email to vanamalibooks@gmail.com, VANAMALI books, plural, @gmail.com. So with that note, I'll hand it back to Smita, please.
Okay, thank you, Shaji. Once again, thank you very much, Mataji, for grace your occasion. We'll just do a small ending prayer, and we'll end. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamodachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyati. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Thank you, everyone. Namo Narayana. Namaste.
Om Namah. Hari Om. Jai Shri Krishna.